very thankful that I can spend this time with you and share some stories that I heard from my mentors and my grandparents. There was many of the stories and ceremonial practices that I have witnessed through my grandparents and my uncles, and some of the stories that affect our lives today. So uh, one of the teachings, we are at a point of life that the teachings that we receive are very important to our culture, are very important to our people. And uh, some of the things that rituals that came into our life have been around for thousands of years. And uh, I was told by my teachers, my mentors, most of my teachers and my mentors are all gone now. They all went on to the spirit world. Uh, but there's two types of cultural teachings. There's two kinds. One is the pre-colonialism times about our culture, our ceremonies. And then there's another one that's colonialized teachings, which meant in our world, what we learned so far, we're trying to practice our culture in when our people are in a colonized world. We're trying to recover, we're trying to rescue our younger generations to encourage them to continue the life ways. So um, uh, in the last few sessions, last couple of sessions, we talked about the history of our ceremonies. We talked about the history of our well-being in our ceremony and cultural practices. And some of them teachings came from what is known as pre-colonialism times. And and along the way, some of the things that we have learned, the colonized teachings is some of the literature that's been written about our people. Uh, it's good that it's written and it's good that it's there. We use them a lot today, but it's another version. It's another version of teachings, and overall, they're all good materials. They're all good things that we learn from today. But there are many perspectives of our history, many perspectives of our teachings. But today I wanted to share some overview of our virtues, our laws that we live by. From my references are on the materials that I have written down. I grew up witnessing some ceremonies that were always, at that time, they were done in a hidden way. In the hidden ceremonies that our people have practiced, they were really well done. And so some of the teachings came from my grandfather. His name was Samuel Chips Moves Camp. He was born around 1891 and died in the spring of 1973. So he was 82 years old. And he had a Hunka Kola, a Hunka brother. Also, he was a medicine man. His name was Adam Bordo. And they were really close in that generation at that time. And I remember coming to Rosebud with my grandparents and my father and my mother, and we would go to Adam Bordo's home in, I believe it's called the Grass Mountain area. And in the evening times, all of the elders will come back around and they will they will take a sweat lodge, and then they'll have ceremonies. And Adam was a young man at that time. Now that I realize how old people were, but he received his instructions and English ceremonies from
How many participants?
a grandpa named Hornships at Mood Camp back in the 1940s, 1950s. Grandpa Sam carried teachings, and they made relations with that. But their history of the language goes back to the pre-colonialism times, and they had an answer for all of the issues that we'll be facing today. The methods, the rituals that were given to us, they talked about it like they were there. They were talked about the future. And some of the things that they talked about we're facing today. We're right in the middle of them. So one of them is the conflict resolutions. They have described that our people will have challenges with internal conflict and how to overcome and utilize the ethics of the tools and the ceremonies that were given to us. And so I have a little presentation that I wanted to share, and from there we'll also talk about the conflict resolution that our people that carry. So I wanted to make sure that I have the right could everybody see this on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Some of the teachings that I received that are Lakota Way the life ways of the ethics and laws that were given to us. And these are just talks that I received from the people that I respected and I grew up learning from. So it's information that I received. I'm just passing it on to you. And they started talking about Lakota, Dakota, Nakota Nation, and the words that they talked about. What is a Lakota? Go ahead. I think they said those things so that I can hear it, and me and other relatives that were young. Who are they now? Where did they come from? What made them Lakota Oyate? And first of all, being Ixtewi Chasha, Lakota Oyate, everyone has different versions of the human world. The Lakota version of a human world, Akantu Oyate. Okay, that is the really important language that I learned on those days. Lakota Oyate, Akantu Oyate, the humans that live on top of the earth. Akantu Ichasha na Wiya, the human being is comprised of the circle of life, the symbol of the medicine wheel that we all use today. Shangaleshka, it kind of goes in deeper and deeper, the way they talk about it. And then, so I only went as far as I could, understanding the circle. Shangaleshka, the circle has a representation of the spiritual aspect and the human aspect. So the spiritual aspect, Shangaleshka, is placed in our soul. Mimela, which wakao mimela wa onelo. Okay, that was a really important factor, that our personal lives carry the circle of life. and also the human world, the physical world, the circle represents different aspects of our life. The black represents the Nasula, Kawachi, and the red represents the We, the bloodline, Kacha. The yellow represents the Nari. The white one represents our Okhan. The wheel of life, the circle, Lakota Wichon, the Lakota medicine wheel. They call it medicine wheel nowadays, but a long time ago had Changaleshka wa Mimela wa Khan. So the colors all represent the spiritual laws, the language, and the songs from the West, what controls our mind. The Shah, the red is our bloodline, the virtues, the teachings that what we learn about the buffalo world and the four-legged relatives. The yellow also represents the same as our Otakuye, Nagi, the spirit of our relatives and four-legged. They placed the elk on that nation because the elk is really the keeper of the wisdom, and the white is our behavior and our ancestors as they live in the world. So being human as Lakota is the people of honor. When they describe the word Lakota, it describes the peace, honor, dignity, a nation of integrity, spirituality, cultural virtues, and relations with all beings. Okay, on chaga wa aka on kompi taku wa ka yohila wotakwe hena on happy. Ona samha troganta kia we chonchaga wa yinkta chanke hena on neon kompi. That was the way they said it. And where does the Lakota Oyate come from? So according to the legends and the teaching of these elders that I mentioned, Lakota Oyate came from the spirit world. Wanahiataha, Uhipinaha, Uchahpi, Ounchari, El Ohan, Wichonchari, Wicharacha, Oheche, Hetaha, Wakanja, Itarapina, Uhipi. Being human, Lakota Oyate, but didn't come from alone, or they came from the world of winged people. There was a real long conversation that they had. Before the colonialism of our life, we were taught and born with some laws that are really important to us. And that's what makes us a spiritual nation, spiritual being. Which, before the era, around 1450s, the Lakota lived in large homes. Tiwahe Trapikiha, Tiuktampi or tipi, Tiuktampi. Similar to this drawing, large homes, Tiuktampi, it was made out of willows and barks, and that was the home of the Lakota as far as they remember. So when we call Ti, it is the center of our family, or every family has Wakan Oti, their sacred home. And the non-relative, non-human relatives that come from the ancestral world, they say the same thing about our homes, but they also call it something else, the spiritual language. The spiritual language is really a unique language that it takes really, you got to really pay attention. So they call this Wahochpi Nitawa. So the Lakota used it to teach the younger people when they get certain age. They always say, "Wana konishkalaka, wana wahochbi wanjindianichicharing." When you describe that word, he says, "When you are old enough to build your own nest, which means your own home." And the whole teachings behind that is when they reach certain age, they teach them to be independent spiritually, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Sovereignty. Igiluhayo, wanan igiluhaktalo, which sovereignty is a spiritual sovereignty. So the home represents the sovereignty of the human being, the relatives. The Tinipi was the first ritual. It represents the home of the Oyate. Also, along the way, it was told that it represents the woman's home. It represents the family. So Inipi came from a long, long ways in a long, long history. And the large home story that represents the Inipi, the large home represents the female. There was always a teachings that women, of all nations, no matter what nation you are, if you're a you're Wakan, your energy and the power that you present, you were born with a sovereign nation as a woman. You have spiritual independency. They say that we have the woman, our mothers and our grandmothers and our great grandmothers, uh, they have a sacred spirit, sacred being watching over them. Uh, uh, that sacred being is called the womb. The womb. How many organaka? It's alive. It's got its own life. It takes care of the woman. That's all it does. It takes care of the woman. It collects all the toxins and collects all uh, the things that gathered in a woman, and then on certain types of certain part of the month, the we, it gets rid of that used blood. It get rid of used the blood ways, and then it restores a life. That's what makes that human, particular human, a special, a wakam, the female nation. And it's always been that way from the beginning of time, and it's still that way today, that the women are more powerful than today as we speak. I always say the women are more powerful than the Bible, or more powerful than a sweat lodge, even more powerful than a pipe. The women, the power and the energy remains the superpower. The gender roles in our life, they're always the leader of our people. And then it's the men that follows instructions. And then we have the children. And back in the old days, when the old people described a nation, they always say, the house, the family, the tioshpai, the nation runs on the buffalo model of raising a community. It's a real hard journey. So, the new world of virtues. According to the Lakota teaching, a Lakota Wiya had a vision after the 1450s. The woman was given instructions to build a nation, and healthy families can live on the earth. Wakantanka sent seven gods, seven Wakan Oyate, to visit the Wiya. And the seven gods came to see her one night from the spirit world. She had a powerful vision, and it was real. It wasn't a dream. She heard people calling her, and she answered it. She went outside her home. And the men, they were all sitting on horses, and they called her over, and they said, "Waniang ohi below." That was the old story. Lakota Tawobche Wakaya Unichahi below. The first man, his name, introduced his name to the Wiya, and his name is Wochike Galoha Mani, Emonchiapalo, the walks with prayer. And the second man introduced himself. He's Wachante Oganaka Mani, Emonchiapalo, generosity keeper. And third, Wichasha, the third man said, Wawa Chintkanka Henagaluha Mani Misha Machapalo Eket, fortitude keeper. Those are translated the best they could about those people's names. The fourth man, Woksape Galuha Mani, the wisdom keeper. And the fifth man's name was Chantet is a money, Machapalo Eket. Lakota virtues and the laws. Itishak pe wichasha wogalake yukahe wayuo niha igluo niha money mochiapalo. He walks with honor. And the seventh wichasha, the seventh man said, woka igluha money mochiapalo, walks with respectfulness. Each man told a woman that they have brought her, they will guide her to build a nation, and the nation until the end of the time. So the vision goes on that each man, the first man, Wochik Gloha Mani, he explained to the Wiya that the prayers, the Wiya Wochik Garab in the healing, the energy that the woman carries can either go two ways: to build a powerful family, rebuild a strong man that has integrity, honor, and respect. Or if the woman does not know these virtues, he can destroy man. He can cause a man to do harm to himself and others and live in a lost world. The women have powerful two worlds that he carries. The ceremonies that were guided to us, that were given to us, most of them came from the women nation. Just staying healthy, live a long, healthy life. And at the time, the women had their own rights, the 7 women's rights that were given to them. And they usually tell that to them today in a colonized teaching. Whenever they do the womanhood ceremonies, they teach that women's rights to the young girls that are becoming women. The second man said, "Wo chinthankakehe wo obche, wo wang shila na wo okachnecha wo ableze, wa iotala na ha okabla wishong tedoa." The compassion, acceptance, understanding, and love and freedom is a key of the generosity spirit, or having a passion to come forth and helping others. We help each other mainly through prayers. And a woman teaches us that we cannot possess anything. We only keep ourselves in the world. We come here alone and we will go alone. The third man's teaching is understanding and strength. The fourth man is is the key for a healthy life. Today, it applies to that. We have to live in two worlds. We have to have the white man's education, the Western model, and as well as the Lakota, or where we come from. You have to educate. Every day, we educate ourselves from two worlds before the day goes on. We try to learn something about the modern world we're living, and then the ancestral world, even if it's one language, we learn that today. Okay, the fourth man's vision of wisdom keeper. The sixth man offers, woyo niha, okay, niglu niha mayanikiha, okay, tcheha maniktelo, the wokaria maniktelo. In this modern world, we live in a white man's world. It's a kind of like a beautiful world, but you really gotta pay attention as a human being. Your lifeways, your livelihood of your whole life is controlled by other entities in this world that dictate our life. And in order to get by that, we have to accept that we're a part of that world. So as the modern world, your whole credibility is controlled by three entities: the credit bureau, and your livelihood, whether you can finance a car or have a cup of coffee in a big city with no money, your credibility is a key factor. The TransUnion, Equifax, and the other one. But there were three of them that were part of the society today that your name and your it's all controlled by how well you pay your bills and how well you live your life. The numbers, it's controlled by numbers. And if you happen to miss a payment of your finances, your numbers will go down. And all kinds of stuff is a factor. So if you're in the 700s level, you're in good hands. You know, you can probably finance a car or a home. But if your numbers fall below 500 to 400, you know, you'll kind of have a rough time. That was the Western model that we live in today. There's no way we can get around that. But in a Lakota, honorable credibility is based around the circle of life that we carry in our soul and our spirit. So the honorable way, neocha, your credibility amongst your people is based on your behavior, your way of life, how you conduct yourself, and how the words that you have said to other people. And so when we realize that we stepped out of line, we try our best to wagaluashte, try to make amends with people that you might have hurt or you might have, you know, disappoint and stuff like that. So in order to regain the credibility, you can do all kinds of good things in your life, but if you make one mistake in your life, your whole credibility is out the door. You know, they're going to remember that little bad thing before they remember you of all the things that you did. That's just the human behavior. The seventh, respect. Walua niha, nigalua niha nanisha, ta opinichik. The people will respect you as well. The people will take care of you that way. So those are the seven wolves that was given to us. Which she took that teaching and she took it seriously. She worked really hard and she invented the kind of tipi, the first tipi that was created. So she gathered the hides and she gathered poles and the other elements. And then she invented the tipi. The hides are the men protecting the family. The poles are the winya. And the little pegs are told us, we were told that they represent the children. Oh, hey, there's a T. Wotakwe, domain that we raise our families with. So we really depended on the buffalo and the hides and the livelihood. We didn't have chainsaw and axes back then, so the poles were not really fancy, but they were the best they could. And each teepee was only like around 8-footers and 7-footers, but it's only meant for the man and wife and a little baby. But when that child gets bigger, he's required to build his own teepee. Which compared to today, you know, we overdo it on our compassion. So even if it's our children are ready to leave the home, we don't want to let them live alone or go on their own. So we hang on to our kids. And so our family, our general Tiwahe, we got a lot of extended families living with us. And that's just a cultural thing based on our compassion and our fear. But the life of the high tipi era from 1450s to the 1850s, Lakota depended on the buffalo. Tatkanka wakul dashna. They work hard to make sure it's ready. But during the tragic era from the 1850s to the 1860s or 1880s, uh, the government and the soldiers, they killed and most of the buffaloes. The government, through treaty obligations, Wagaluash, they try to make it a change. So they got rid of the buffaloes, but the government came and introduced the canvas tipis to our people from the 1850s to 1890s, and the first canvas teepees that they're not as good as the hide, but they'll work. Back in the old days, that's what they had, and the killing of the Lakota home and life is when you destroy the buffalo, the history of our relationship with the Pteoyate. The government kind of had an idea how we value those, so they killed all the buffalo. They said every buffalo killed is an Indian gone. Some United States soldier made that quote. The slaughtered buffalo in the 1800s, 5,000 buffaloes were killed on daily basis. I thought that was part of the Black Hills or the Badlands, but those are all buffalo skulls that they collected. And then around the 1890s to the 1900s, we're getting more towards the modern times, the government came back and issued all Indian families a new style of home, the four walled homes with the stovepipe sticking out. That was the general modern day home for the Lakota Oyate. So up until the 60s, I remember every family had, even though they live in modern houses, they have the unchi, they call it unchi chatio blecha, the grandmother's tent. And in the summertime, they'll put up their tents outside their houses, and takojas can sleep in there or play like they're camping out or stuff like that. But every family had a tent like that. And when you come to the Rosebud Fair, all that area with the fairgrounds, it was filled with white tents, like this one in a picture. I remember seeing one during the back in the 60s. It was a beautiful sight, and I'm pretty sure some people had some photos of those, living in those tents. And then as we move on into the 60s, most everybody had log cabins, log houses, and chantipi. They call it chantipi, or either some people managed to have round houses. So tigamigma, but that was the home of the Lakotas on the reservation. What was the important part of this era was that even though the home of the log cabin, they didn't have any electricity or plumbing, running water, or they used wood stove. It was their home, that was theirs, and it represented the sovereignty of our nation. They don't owe anybody any rent. They don't have to pay bills. They had their own living. Lakota igluha. During this time, the government also issued farm equipment to the families. There's a plow and rake and hay cutters, and that was part of the treaty obligations. So they took the horses away that we were used to, and they replaced it with their own draft-like horses, team. And during this time, the challenges that came and the non-human relatives that come from the other world, they still call these homes Wahochpi. And Tiwahe, the Lakota word for the team of horses, they call it king. King, a short word for Kashunke king. That means that they're wearing a harness. And the Champagamiampi, the wagon, the wheels were made out of wood and then later became iron, steel wood. So that represented a home. So one spiritual language that I used to remember a lot was the hardships, and they passed down to my grandpa Sam or grandpa Adam when they talk to a young family. They're having some troubles, and they'll say, that was a spiritual language. It really meant that the team that's pulling your wagon, your home, one of the team horses is not all there. He's trying to go the other way. And so you break down that message, it really meant that the loyalty of a man and home is not real. One of them is cheating on the other. One of them is looking the other way. So that disloyalty was described in a language that is really hard to describe, But that's what they mean by families breaking up. And that's when the conflict or resolution comes into play. Lakota sovereignty of Igiluha, Lakol Igiluha, a family is talked about, where he gardens and he takes care of himself and lives in his own house, that he owns it. That's what called a sovereign independent Tioshpai. And that's how the government recognized us. And it was the agreement of 1851 and 1868 that the government agreed to keep us sovereign and not to depend on it. But over the years, that kind of disappeared, So, around the 1950s and 60s, they came out with this literature, books about star knowledge, but from the old days, from the version of these grandparents that I mentioned, the only relationship we had with the stars was this dipper. They represent a lot of stories, the 7 virtuals of our life, the 7 ceremonies of our life, the 7 generations, which that dipper has a lot of meaning to it. So the Lakota version, the gods that came to see the woman came from that world that we just saw in the picture. Akantu Shni Oyate, they were non-humans that gave us guidance. The era of outlawing our life, they basically outlawed the Lakota life. So most of those teachings that we had described earlier, the ghost dance, sun dance, and Uepi, Loampi, and all the ceremonies, the elders somehow managed to take that underground. So from the 1800s to 1960s, the government outlawed and banned cultural language, teachings, ceremonies, basically our way of life. They colonized our people and they taught us a different way of belief or language. So during this time, the also terrible things that happened in our memory was Lakota women were targeted by the government to control the population. The women were sterilized without their consent. Young women, they take them to a hospital for whatever checkup, but without their knowledge, they made it so they can't have babies. And then the men were used as guinea pigs around the World War II. They literally just gave them alcohol to do studies on them. So after our uncles and grandpas that went to the war, World War II, everybody came home when the war was over, but except for the Native American men. They gathered them, they took them to a camp or a base station in Texas somewhere, and they literally kept them there, gave them alcohol. You know, some drink wine, some were given whiskey and vodka. And they did some studies on them, how long the effects and it takes the human being, the guinea pigs. And then after they're done with their study, they sent them home. So they came back addicted to alcoholism. And that was a sad history of our people. The new era today of Lakota, now we have gained or resurfaced around the 70s. Now they came back in. But it didn't really come back in as they left us. It came back in a different way. A lot of our ceremonies were hidden, and then some of the ceremony keepers died. So many of our teachings came back through with the authorization of the government. They wanted to keep track of our teachings. They dictated, the colonialized cultural practice was still dictated by the government, by the white man. Now, when I say the white man, I'm not talking about white people, I'm talking about the government. And it was always dictated. So they allowed us, we rarely struggled back in, for example, I use the Sundance as an example. The Sundance was a real powerful ceremony. There still is, but back in the practice, when it was almost gone, it came back into our lives through the concept of a powwow. The government looked at it as a powwow. And so it snuck back in. They always monitor it so it doesn't threaten the society. So in Pine Ridge, I remember my first Sundance experience and watching, being observant, and being part of the audience. Pine Ridge had a Sundance, and the government allowed them to have the Sundance from 6 o'clock in the morning, and they danced till 12 o'clock noon. And then the Sundance was over for the day. And then at 1 o'clock in the afternoon till midnight, they have the powwow. So it was really interesting to see a Sundance tree in the middle of the powwow grounds and the grand entry. And people, they accepted it that way, for a long time in Pine Ridge. And then there's at the same time, at the same place, there's a carnival and a rodeo, and it was Oglala Nation's annual fair, but it was held in conjunction with the Sundance. And a lot of Sundance participants, it was relatively new, so they didn't complain. They just went along with it until the late 71. I think that was the last one. And some of the younger people decided to, no, let's go back and do the real thing. We don't want to do it this way. So they broke off and they started to hold the Sundance ceremony, the real one, back in the days. I think Lake Sheep Crow Dog family was one of the first hosts of bringing our Sundance to a real Sundance. People come back and do it that way. So I'm very thankful for the relatives in Sichanvu and the people today. Today came back a long ways, and we were able to practice our culture without having to worry about going jail and stuff like that. So, but it's up to the individual how well you take that ceremony. The Wambli was a relative of ours, and our relationship to the eagle goes deeper than it appears to be. We tie plumes on our children. We use the feathers as a symbol of truth. Wotakwe. And the government claimed that as their official bird too. So when we try to use the bird, we have to get the government's permission. We have to carry a license. And if you don't, you might go to jail or get prosecuted. So that was a Waktawa China. Eagle is relative, is still alive today. But their sacred sites are still alive today as well. And here's a picture of Eagle Nest Butte. But back in the old days, when Grandpa Sam and Kahonska and Hornchips and that era, that Eagle Nest Butte was called Wanagi Trapaha, the non-human relatives place, the home. But underneath that butte, there was a log cabin, and there was a man that took care of that place. His name was Wambali Hochpi. That was his name. And then later on, the butte was named after that man. The sacred sites are still here. There's a Mathopaha and the buffalo are relatives. Our Pteoyati survived. They almost killed all of them, but somehow they came back alive. And their spirit and their energy is still really strong with our people. The post-colonialism amongst the Lakotas was imposed. The post-colonialism was imposed in 1920s and 2019 or today, 2021. The government brought the new housing program, and from the version that I heard was around the late 60s, a president of the United States, one of them, came to visit the reservations, all of the reservations, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. But when he came to the Dakotas, he noticed how Ushika we lived according to the Western view. Some of our people lived in log cabins, and some people lived lucky to get a trailer house, and some people even got luckier because some of our people were great carpenters and to build their own frame houses. And so, people were doing the best they can to live in them. And the government, the president had a woam shila. He had a compassion. What he saw was saddened him. So he went back and wrote a proclamation that about the Indian people. He says the first Americans deserve a better life with the government to government relationship. It is the responsibility of the government to make sure that our tribal members, the Indian people, have better housing, better conditions with plumbing and better housing for the people. So they introduced, he introduced a bill to the Congress, and he wanted houses to be built for these people. And so the housing project was born. It was sent, but it didn't really go out the way the president had a dream. It went through the bureaucracy, the process of all of our departments, housing development and the Congress, and the Republicans and Democrats, they kicked it around. And finally, the tribes were able to build their own housing project. What was wrong with that was that the government, the president wanted each Indian at least one shot, one time only, to be given a house on their land to replace the log cabin. But when it took off from his office and went through the whole system, it ended up in the tribal government's property. And the tribal government built our houses that we live in today. But the thing is, the Indians don't own them. Lakota, we don't own these houses. The tribe does. The tribal government. So we have to pay rent. And if we don't pay rent, we'll get kicked out. It turned into a business. So many Lakotas left their log cabins, moved into town, and now we have all the housing projects. The land is not there, and now that's how we end up with the housing projects. The continuation, but there's still a housing shortage on all our reservations. And so about 85% of our Lakotas living on our reservations, we're still homeless. We don't own our own homes. We woke as ololo yankapi. Lakota, they said, Tiwahe on kitkapi ki ololo yankapi. We rent our houses. And so that was just a story about our people, how we, and the education system was a real horrifying experience to our people, but it turned out that it turned out to be a positive thing today. We've been really blessed that we have our own education system in place. You know, we have colleges and tribal controlled housing schools, and so things can looking hopeful in the future. According to the ancestrals' worldview, it'll get better. It'll get better because many of our tribal members earned some type of a college degree, and many of our people are really educated people. Some are senators, some of our congressmen, or the well-to-do. We come to a good future today, and we live well with each other. In recent years, our reservation experienced high rate of suicide and violent death amongst our people. That was only because around 1950s, the alcohol became legal among our people. And it's all of the suicidal death that you've heard about or seen or know about, even the thoughts of doing it or attempts, is related to the substance abuse related events, broken families, the emotionals. Our emotions got disturbed. So our true control of our emotions life is gone, or it's not gone, but it's left ourselves. And we lived in a colonialized, dictated emotional life. We get chanzeka right away, or we don't have control on how our worldview is. So that's a colonized cultural practice. Uh, the post-colonialism is Lakota, young and old. Uh, we never have problems before during the pre-colonialism time. There was no such thing as mental health issues. We never experienced depression. We never experienced anxiety. But it was only until 1950s afterwards, here on to the present day, we're dealing with difficulty with mental health issues, emotional intellect. We struggle with our emotions. We struggle with our anxiety and anger and resentment and the things that make us astray. Our sacred circle that was placed in our souls became broken. And but that's also changing. It's getting better. Each person that committed suicide, one of the non-human relatives tell us, each person that died horribly, suicide through alcoholism or self-destructions, they have left you a message, the oyate, they left us a message. So we're seeking for suicide prevention. We got all these prevention programs going and intervention, but our spiritual worldview, the people that have left us through suicide, they left us a written, a well-defined message for us, what they wanted, the reason why they left. And it is up to us to read that language, their message, and that the loss of our virtues, the way of life that we had wandered into has got to change. It's got to change. That was what they were asking for. So today, the message from this presentation, the little short presentation, is you have to educate yourself. You have to have the ability to re-educate yourself, not through things, the literature that's written, but through your own mind and through your own will, learn about your people, and then learn about the Western world, living two worlds, getting along with people. Educate others, help others. And so some of the things that some of these messages, the stuff, I wrote them down. I learned it from a great grandma from 1890s to 1960s. Her name was Adam Border's wife is Alice Little Elk Bordeaux. Ida Little Thunder, Winnie Iron Rope Chips, grandmother Elk Looks Back. The list kind of goes on to the old people, you know, Jake Little Thunder, Joseph Ashley, Joe Chips, Albert Chips, Ellis Chips. Here's a picture of my father. He died in 1991, born in 1911. My grandfather laying sideways, I forgot to straighten that part out, but his name was Samuel Mooskamp. He was born 1891 and died 1973. We have some diaries about these people that what they have written down. Hornchips was born 1873 and died 1946. His brother James was born 1869 and died 1949. And their father, the great-great-grandfather, was Chips Woptucha. He was born around, I made a mistake on his birthday. He was born in 1830 and died 1916. So that is a short version of the story about the virtues that was important. And today, our biggest issue that we struggle today is the conflict resolutions, the conflict that we have today. And they must have knew that was coming because they have prepared us. And what is the tool, what is the ritual of the conflict resolution is the chanumpa, the pipe that was given to us. And around back in the day when all these ceremonies came to our people, somewhere along the way in later years, later parts, Wiya again brought the chanumpa to our people. And the story had a lot of versions. People had a lot of different stories about how the buffalo calf came to the people. But according to the elders that I showed you in the references, it originally started when a young woman was on a journey and he was met by two cousins, and they stayed with her for Wiwanji Yokise, which meant a little over a month. They're trying to help her to get to her destination. And along the way, the power and the energy of a woman really played with the minds of those men, because men are weak sometimes. And one of those men was not thinking very healthy, and he thought about the woman, and he wanted to be with her. And she didn't resist, because she knew that men are that way. So she said, do what you have to do, actually. So he went and approached her, and they walked off into the creek, and she instructed the other guy that had more respect to watch over the bundle. And then it turned out that that man had a bad experience and died, and he was all turned into bones and snakes all over that body. But she came back and told the other one, he says, your life is this way. The Lakota, the human life in the world is always that way. You will see in the life of a lot of abuse. The women were going to be abused, but it's always going to be a bad. Justice will always come from that, the consequences. The men will pay for it. So teach your young men to be spiritually strong, and those things won't happen now. And that teaching came all the way to our present day throughout the history. 1 out of 4 or 2 out of 5 women experienced abuse of some type, because of the weakness, and then alcohol and substance abuse, or whatever the history was. Women those are our people, but they're carrying a lot of pain of history, and it creates internal conflict with each other, with themselves first, and then it affects others. It affects the relationships. It affects their children. So the man got the message and he went home and told his people. He said, there's a woman coming and she's a powerful woman, you know, and she told them what happened and they all got ready. And they were ready for her when she arrived, and she presented this bundle to the head of the person, the head of the camp, the I think his name was Elkhead. And the instructions was, this Chanumpa will bring Wolakota kile aping tachachichu. And then the second one is Huichong Chage, the generation, the life of the children. So that's the laws that the pipe that came in with. We already had our virtual, we already had our rituals in here already, but the pipe was to fulfill the energy and the power of our own internal struggles, Wola Kota. So when you talk about Wola Kota, you're talking about conflict resolution in a modern version. So the woman walked away and then they followed her, and here she turned into a little buffalo calf and disappeared. So along with our teachings that came from history, pre-colonialism teaching, the modern world, we added the Christian teachings, the foreign teachings, we added the buffalo, we added white buffalo. You know, that never really happened, but the white buffalo came in later. So now we're all stuck on, we all get excited when a white buffalo is born someplace, but that was something that learned later on, that somebody created, somebody made that up. And most of our people back in the late 1800s to early 1900s, we were Christianized, whether we like it or not. So some of the teachings that we received, the white buffalo was added on there, but originally it was just a regular simple buffalo, a relative. So the chanumpa, the ethics of people carrying the chanumpa, we were told that Tohan chanumpa he yuha mayani hanta. Whenever you walked with the pipe, educate yourself the ethics of what it takes to carry a pipe. First of all, you start from yourself. Use the pipe to resolve your internal conflict that you have with yourself. You can't be living with resentments. You can't live in with pain, or you can't live with anger in a spiritual life that we live today. That Chanumpa has the powerful, it still remains a powerful sacred element, sacred being. And if you use it right, you'll probably end up being a real healthy human being. And then the second ethical laws of our pipe is Wola Kota Gahwachio. Try to find a better solution resolving conflict. So you start with yourself, and then you start with your relatives and loved ones, the families that are struggling. There's always a way to help them reconcile and reunite families for the sake of their children. Now, the second law that she said, the Wichongchage is the ongoing future of the lifeways of the children. No matter what nation they come from, children are all innocent. They just learn bad things from the older people, but they came into this world as angels and innocent gods. But along the way, they learned what it is to be disappointed, to hurt, to feel the physical and emotional distress. All the things that the trouble that happened, they learned it from the older people in society as well. So the pipe is made to overcome that, prepare our children the rightful teachings and save the children's lives. That's what that pipe is for. So when when you pray with the Chanumpa, always remember the children. Every day, even if as we speak, crimes are happening against children somewhere. Children is neglected, children is trafficking, human trafficking, children are being violated. But the Chanumpa is supposed to still be here and be strong, but where are the teachers? You know, they misunderstood what the pipe is for. And once that pipe came to the Lakota nation, the reality is that there is no such thing as bad medicine. There is no such thing as witchcraft or bad things. It was the oppressor, the government, and the Christian life. They attacked our Indian ceremonies and they gave us the label of bad medicine. So now throughout the United States, many Indian tribes still believe that there's bad medicine. Khmuga and the Wakonza, even our own well-known medicine men today in our country still believe that bad medicine can happen. But the reality, according to these old people that I mentioned earlier, there is no such thing as bad medicine. And well, one thing to tell you is that don't wakunza. Wakunza is a very sacred word. It's if you try to pray against somebody in a bad way, uh, it'll come back to you. That's the rule of the thumb. But the Lakota wokichunze, now this is spelled a little different, but wokichunze means praying for the good things for the people and a sacred fate among the people. So today we're really struggling with a lot of bad things and the ceremonial ways. You might get disappointed about people's behavior, but you just ignore that and then just stay within the true reality about our rituals, where they came from, and the power of the pipe. It's between the sovereignty that you built is you and God. That's it. There's no lies between there. There will never be no lies between those two worlds. So that's the conflict of resolutions. Our people really lived by that hundreds of years ago. I mentioned the effects and history of our things that happened a long time ago. Right here on Rosebud, there was two Lakotas, the prominent, well-known leaders, got into a conflict, and it had a lot of effect. Even today, it affected all of our Lakotas' life. As a matter of fact, it infected all of the Indian tribes, because this conflict was back in the 1881s. One killed the other, and it started a major conflict. The Tioshpais, they were fighting each other, their revenge and all the back and forth. But the people that carried the Chanumpa back in those days were serious about how the things were. So they called the pipe carrier, the pipe keeper. I think she was a woman at that time. And she came and gathered Wichasha and Williams, held a tribunal in the Indian country, and they made Wolakota. They made peace. Wolakota Karap. And all of the bands that were involved became peace again and became one nation. And today, that family and the people, descendants, are getting along real well. That was something that happened a long time ago. You don't bring that up again. But what the government didn't like that process, and they imposed laws against our people. And from there, we have the 7 Major Crimes Act that was built on our people. But 7 generations, the families that were in conflict made a vow, and they pledged with the pipe that they'll never fight each other again. And what was done is done in the past, and a new generation will continue. So it was an important historical lesson, but it was because of the power of the pipe that there was many stories like that. That was just not the only stories, but so many of them, that the role of the pipe was to make peace. But first, you have to make peace with yourself. And they said us Lakotas are like the Chawaka, our tree. And during my years of traveling, I always talk about, I went to California to visit some friends and back in when I was 19 years old or 20. And I visited this family, and one morning, early in the morning, I was the only one up. So there was coffee made, and I made coffee, and I sat in our backyard. And I noticed that this family had a fruit tree in the backyard. And when the sun came up to surface and rise, that tree was a beautiful orange tree, Kasponzi, healthy looking trees, big, they look like grapefruits, real nice. Boy, I was admiring that tree, and I was thinking to myself, man, these oranges are top quality. Here, they fell off some of them fell off the tree, they're all over the ground. And these families really didn't know how valuable these are in Rapid City or Mission or wherever. We pay a lot of money for these fruits, and so that, it's just a cultural thing, and I noticed that as the sun got brighter and my coffee was second cup of coffee, that tree had another set of fruits on the same tree, on the same trunk. There was a lemon tree. Lemons were growing on the same tree. So on the one tree, one trunk, you had two types of fruits, a lemon and an orange. And that was really amazing. That kind of blew me out of the water, I say, wow, man. For the longest time, I sat to see how that happened. But the tree itself was a spiritual being. He accepted the difference. It didn't create no conflict with itself. It still managed to produce healthy fruits. And I compared that to myself and says, that it's a big teaching for us, those that practice the Indian ways, is that our bloodline may contain a white man's blood and the Indian blood, or maybe even a mixture. And sometimes it causes us internal conflict. Our spiritual journey comes to a halt sometimes. We experience anger, we experience disappointments or resentments. But like the tree, we need to let those things go, those petty things, and be proud of the nations that we represent as a human being. We have to accept who we are as a human being, no matter what bloodline we represent. Today, it will be a healthy world, like that fruit tree. And that's what the Chanumpa, the pipe, is brought to us to help you renew your life and live a healthy life, accepting what is in your bloodline, accepting all cultures that you represent. And we don't have no time to be resentful or lose our self-esteem. Or I hear some of my friends or my relatives said, I don't like that part of myself, I just claim this side of my family, all that stuff, and it shouldn't be like that. You need to accept yourself as a whole being before you can move on to the world, the healthier world. So that is the conflict resolution. We have it right in front of our life, that the pipe is so powerful that it can almost resolve any kind of conflict if we use it right. And that's all it was given to us for in the first place, is to solve internal conflict. It's how you use your chanumpa to seriously make a life of your own and your own journey. So it's just sitting in front of us, but we misled the colonialism practice. We use it only when it's convenient, and we don't have no relationship with our chanumpas. But it's still here, and I think that when we learn more about it, it becomes an important part of our life, about peace. Today, 80% of our populations on all reservations, there's there's single families. The Tiwahe, the Juju, our family is broken up, single families. Usually the mother raising our children or the grandma raising the takojas because the mom and daddy broke up and they started different families. And the list goes on about the oppression that our children are suffering from. And but the pipe was given to us to prevent that stuff. The pipe was given to us to restore families. So we want a better life for our children, but we're not doing it. So that's what our spiritual cultural practices are today. So Justin or Marlis, I'll stop here for any questions or comments, and then I want to thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you. It's a great honor that I can do that.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, one time I had a stroke, and I went to a ceremony. That medicine person isn't with us anymore. He passed away. But he said that it was because someone was jealous of me. He didn't say if it was a person or a spirit or whatever. But I worked at an ambulance service then, and I was pregnant, and I wasn't married to my baby's father. We're just two young people, and I got pregnant. But anyway, I was curious about that. After you said that there's no bad medicine or anything, how come that happens?
Well, you know, I know that those meanings are a little deeper in ceremony when they tell you that somebody did that to you, jealous of you. That probably mean that that jealous person or the mad person, they might have been dead. You know, it might be from a dead person that was that's still around, and it might have happened in a way where a non-human relative came close to you and caused you to have that stroke because you worked in the ambulance place. There's a lot of spirits that are not healthy that goes around, so that could mean that too. But that's the closest I can probably answer that question. That I don't think that anyone has any kind of power to make life miserable for anyone. But it's maybe through verbal or prayer, or if somebody did pray against you, maybe it fell back on them. So it's they call it wakunza. People try that. They try to do bad medicine on each other because they learned it from the colonialized society. I know that relatives from other tribes, they really believe that. They're just wholeheartedly just spent their energy going to medicine people, trying to lift bad energy, bad medicine away from them. But
That's a good thing. Otherwise, there'd be a whole bunch of people with a crooked face.
yeah. But the important thing is that you're still here and you're still practicing your ways, and that's good. You continued your life journey, and that's what we want to tell our people, to continue to do the good things.
Hi, Lakshmi.
Oh.
Just wanted to ask you, with all these ceremonies and things that have taken place. Do you remember when the first Lawampi or Uepi ceremony was practiced, was performed?
Well, on the earlier presentation, around 1400s, the first medicine person that was known was a Khatkanka Wapia Wichasha. And that Khatkanka Wapia Wichasha came from a generation of a man who was had the privilege of spending a life with a Wian that turned out to be come from the Khatkanka Oyate. So the story began when a man was on a journey, Omani, Ichimani, and here he met a woman out of nowhere, which the man was a real good man. He was a respectful person. So even though that woman was young and alone, he did not do any wrongful things. He took care of her. And along the way, they made good friends, and they spent some time together. And here, one day, the woman said, "I want to take you to meet my family." He went to a nation of people. They came to meet him, and here she introduced him to those people. He said, "Lewi Chashik Atawa, the Yomok Pixiwa Onkte Seche Akach. You can we Chashak Hake. Lewianki Unichu Palo, as Yone Hayo Ake. Now, Xuish Neo Ake, you chant a sheetish deal. Hechanoki, Don Yonkte Ake, Don Loone Hanki Han, which Achtala Yaina. We chant a Wastelo Haktelo Ake. He agreed to follow the instructions of taking good care of that Wian. Which they both walked away, and here the man looked back, and here the people that they were just talking to, they turned into so he was really amazed that he was given the honor that a buffalo turned into a woman, a human being, to be able to live with that man. Which a lila yoke, he didn't see anything wrong with that. He honored that world. And from there, they had a child, Hokshila, where you hawk up. Hokshila grew up to be Wakan, very sacred. Wapiak. He doctored people and people that were having a hard time. Woi hambale yuhacha. But because the woman came from a strange world, that man's relatives were sort of not accepting her. The woman kind of stayed back and didn't really socialize with the people. But the people turned against her, they talk about her, gossip about her. And here, one day that Wian said, they don't like me. So I can't live like that. So I'm going to go home. She didn't say anything. She just packed her stuff and she was walking away. And so the Wichasha and the little boy followed her. And here, she walked up to some herd of buffalo in Oha Kigalaka. She wandered off in there. And she turned into one of them, and they all scattered away. Furthermore, they disappeared. There were Wanagi Khatkanka Oyate. So, Ukshilaki, they weren't sad because she didn't die. Oyate Huksha Oha Kigalaka. Wanagiata Kigalaka. Hukshilaka Chagina or Kawichit Hukau. He got married and they had 2 boys and a girl. Chinjayamani. They were born Wakhan. They were sacred. Hocha one of them had relations in Wapia, became a horse medicine man. Wakanwi chashat. Shunka kan Wapia kap. The one is Wambali Wapia kap, the doctor, the man. And the girl was Wakan with the Hechaka, Nasinte Sapala. Which from that day on, from that time on today, even today, when we pray, we associated each direction with those animals, four-legged. But there was a long history of why we did that. And so there were 4 Wakawi chashas throughout our history. And then along the way, somebody, Mathoa Piaka, bear medicine, Nashugamani to Wapia. Wakawi chashas come in generations. Now, the last one was the Vichasha that had connection. He met the Oyate Chististila, the small people. Wakan Oyate. But Vichasha Oyate Chikala. Hey, Wapie Naha and Vichasha Kiha. His teachings, medicine men, or Pachta Wapia. Later on, they call it the Uepi Wapia. They tie up. But the man that started that, his name was Wahinkpe Wakan. Tawahinkpe. Itazipana Wahinkpe Wakan. It started out how he met those little people was Katiwahe. He had a wife and 2 children. The different tribe. We were enemies with different tribes. And they included him too. They killed him and his wife and his kids. Which later on it turned into scaffolds, but back in the early days they put them on trees. Which we just the pachtapkel, katkanka ha opemenuna. We can't use kiskitana, hitchiwankata, chapkel. That's how they buried our people a long time ago. Katkanka nicht haha oichapemenuna. Which he was buried up there, and here later on he came back alive. Dushke Chunan, he was alive, and he noticed that there was people around him on the bottom of that tree. And then they brought him down and they drug him to a place, and finally they doctored him up here, and they unraveled him. And here it took about a whole year, 405 days. Which actually, like, they're little people. They hide during the day and they come back during the night. But they're little tiny people, smallest ones you can imagine, but there are hundreds of them. And they all brought him food and they took care of him. And so he became, but they didn't, his wife and his children didn't come back. They were permanently dead. But when he came back into the world, he was, they were surprised to see him and that he was alive. And there was something different about him. He had some kolas that they come to him from time to time. And around 1890s, the Wichasha lived in what is called now a Wounded Knee or a Manderson area. And then people were scared of him because he was kind of bitter. He was mad that he lost his wife and children. He didn't get married again or anything. He just stayed by himself. the story went when the food rations by the government, everybody was scared to deliver food to him because of his energy and his power, which I saw my great grandfather, Kahonska Moose Camp, him and Hornships, they were boys. They worked for the Indian police, which they were given assignment to deliver his food for him, which a monthly basis. They found out that he was friendly to them. But anybody else that comes, he wasn't very friendly. So they made relations with him, and they found out that he had some kind of power. Those little people come. And here they found out that his energy and his ability to find things, when people lost stuff, they come to him and he'll find it for them. And but he had bad habits too. He had his friends bring him stuff that he wants, which the government was really leery. They were kind of he wasn't very popular. You come one day in the early 1900s. There was an illness that came that almost killed all the people. It was called tuberculosis. And these boys asked their uncle, the Hunkar, he made them Hunkar sons to help us. Could you ask your friends that is there a medicine that can cure what's killing our people? That man responded, yeah, I never thought about it. So they asked him to relay the message to his kolas that he had a hochoka. And here his kolas came and they brought a herb. And so he gave them instructions how to prepare this herb. And here they were able to cure that tuberculosis. They were able to cure a lot of things. So you have his energy turned into something wakan, where he became a healer using his friends. Later on, when he was getting old, he passed this ritual to his adopted sons, Hornships and Moose Camp, who had first Uepi ceremonies. Before he died, he was really shichala ta kolaku ta chincha hena ate lila konik papaloyake ate konik papicha and doshke chumpicha hoyake. They're scared of you. The people are scared to come to you because you're always saying mean things to people. He told them, yes, I am angry. I can't get rid of this anger. They killed my wife and my children, and I still carry the pain and anger. Maybe I'll die that way. You can't Hornships and Moose Camp said, yeah, so they put him on the Hambalecha before Holy or never Hambalecha, but when he went on the Hambalecha, Tachshawa El Hikab, Sintesapalo, a black-tailed deer came to her, and him and Wolak Hotakaka, Apiaka, Sanzekish near the Hangstio, Neum Compiechel, Neum Tukshawa Lakok Stoak. Wambaliwa Hiotakin and Nakut Chetan Hiotaka. That Wambali turned out to be one of his children, and a red-tailed hawk was another child. Both of those child that got killed, and that Sintesapala was his wife. She turned into his wife and talked to him and made peace. And then they turned into their original animals and they went away. But even him, he made peace within himself. Na galina o wichakixia cha o he don't to this day the Uepi, the ceremonies, they always have a black-tailed deer on the altar and feathers on the altar. O he wola kota. And when he passed away, Hardships and Moose Camp practiced that ceremony. By that time, almost everyone on the reservation were Christianized church, which the Lakota Christians made fun of those two men when they come to town to buy supplies and buy groceries or whatever. They says, hey, why we charge ya? They said, look at those men that were tied up. They got that ritual, that they made fun of them like that, ridiculed them. And that's how their names came up, the Uepi men. It wasn't called Uepi, but it was Hardships' last name. That's how he earned his nickname, was Uepi. But from that day on to this day, the word Uepi, they didn't even know that it was somebody else's last name, Hardships. So I grew up around 1950s, late 50s and 60s. The Uepi Wichashas, they all helped each other. They all got along real well. Which Hardships made a lot of relatives in Rosebud, and he helped a guy named Adam Bordo, that he passed his power on to him. Adam was a Uepi man, and then a Roy Stone, and the kind of list kind of goes on like that, but they were real well-to-do medicine people, and Hardships passed away, and Kahunska passed away later on, but that was the first ceremony that nowadays we have a lot of them. We have a lot of them that they probably have their own altar and their own history about how they became medicine people. But the original, the night ceremony where people get tied up, and that came from a guy named Holy Arrow. And it wasn't really meant to heal anybody, but he made peace, the conflict resolution. So that kind of answers, I hope it answers your question about the first one. And today, anybody, if they have the heart in it, they can become a successful medicine man. But it's a school. You have to have patience and tolerance, and like anything else in the Western world, if you want to become a medical doctor, you got to go back to college, and you got to go through those level steps. And finally, you'll have a license to have a ceremony for, perform, medical practice. It's the same way. Anybody can do it. You understand, and there's a lot of requirements and different things, but it's not impossible. But those people that left us, all they all say is, we hope that when they do this practice in the future, it's the real deal, not a fake one. They got to go school with it. They gotta earn that. There's no easy rides to it. But they always hope that there will be medicine men in the future, because they used to be gone. They were not available. Even in the 1960s, Hardships was called Uepi only because they wanted to make fun of him, but they never once called him a medicine person. And the medicine men were hidden people. My grandpa Adam Bordo was a well-known medicine man in Indian country, but in the other Washicho world, he was I believe he was a president or a vice president of the tribe during the daytimes, but at night he was a different role. So the medicine men didn't exist until 1970s. It came out like that. So. But we have a lot of good medicine men today. So the hope is that they will do the real deal, and someday they will find cure for illnesses that are wiping out our people. You know, that cancer and all that stuff. There's still, I think that medicine is in our country, but we got to learn to work together, I guess. So Pilam, thank you for the questions, and that's the one version that I learned about the first medicine man.
Oh, Wopla, Lakshay. Wopla.
Oh. What I learned from those old people is watching chanka. Oh, hey, that's a virtue. Oh, hey, the patience and tolerance. Hunta, that's a key for practicing our spiritual ways. Oh, hey, watching chanka. And anybody can do that. It takes practice. Watching chanka. But
Nushka Wopila for offering these teachings for all of us. We really appreciate you doing this, and you know, we're hoping this was wonderful, and we're hoping that all of us can take this home and think about it, think about ourselves, and work towards being really sovereign people and share these teachings with our relatives. So I just really appreciate you doing this with us.
Thank you.
So if we don't have any more questions, I think this is going to conclude our presentation, and we're hoping down the road we can do more of these, and we'll just work on it together and see what we can do. So Pilamaya.
Wopila. Yeah, I want to thank everybody for listening and giving me a chance to share some of the words from my grandfathers, and I really appreciate the relatives in Sichangu Makoche. My mother is from Sichangu Wayate, and she passed away in 2006. But before she died, she said, you know, she kind of apologized for not showing me all of the relatives, but life was too short. And that way, so when she died, I started going towards Sichangu. I met my uncles and Russell and Eagle Bear and all the rest of the relatives that I've met along the way. And especially when I see a older woman like my mom, and when I see them, I always remember my mom. You know, she's from Sichangu. And Sichangu is full of great people, great history. And I'm very proud that our people, the icon of Indian ceremonies. I wish good luck to all of the people that practice our ways. Don't be afraid to get out there and wachikya. Pray and take care of yourself. Thank you, Marlis, for allowing me, and Justin Breaker. Justin is one of the greatest singers on Sichangu country. A lot of songs that are being practiced. And we hope that they continue the Sundance this year, even though the pandemic is around us. Do the best you can. And the people, especially the young people that really want that ritual to heal the world. We're in the era of healing. Thank
you. I'm going to tell him about this book. I waited.